Michael is online, and we can see him. Michael, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us. Michael is the research group leader of health informatics at CSIRO, I think it's pronounced, which is the government research agency in Australia. Michael is also an adjunct professor with Griffith University's Institute for Integrated and Intelligent Systems, and has been a member of the IHG-SDO Technical Committee since 2010. Michael specialises in clinical terminology for high-quality clinical data. He is a software developer, and he has developed a tool called SNOMED, which is used in the production of the Australian and international SNOMED CT releases and Australian medicines terminology. And some of you may be familiar with software that Michael's developed. First Snapper, then Minnow as SNOMED browsers, and currently Shrimp is the probably one of the best SNOMED browsers online that you can find. I would say the best, but for some sympathies to the IHG-SDO's own product. So Michael's going to talk to us. The talk title is Let's Get Ontological. You may know that reference if you're of a certain age. So this is a deep dive into SNOMED CT from one of the preeminent experts in it around the world. Michael, would you like to fire away?
Thank you, Alistair. Yes, it'll be a dive as deep as we can get in 15 minutes without losing ourselves in mathematics. So this is the agenda I have for the talk. So the size of the text will give you a rough sense of the relative proportions of where I'm going to spend time. And without further ado, I'll leap into some orientation. So really, if we're looking at the ontological structure of SNOMED, we're looking at the relationships that are used to define the meaning of the concepts. And the question might be, well, what's the value of doing all this? Why this ontological foundation? And there's many reasons. I've pulled out the two key ones I think are worth emphasising. One is in terms of quality assurance. So SNOMED is very large, as you've heard mentioned, 380,000, I think, active concepts approximately, depending on which version you're talking about. And making sure that all the relationships between those concepts are accurate is a tough job, and anyone who's played with SNOMED for any length of time will have discovered some strange things in there. And in fact, there's some well-known papers been published, one by Alan Rector, titled "Getting the Foot Out of the Pelvis," where there's some strange user relationships that have been identified. And really the value of the ontology underpinning is enabling us to detect problems and fix problems in these relationships. The other side of things is, and that's value for the maintainers of SNOMED. For the users of SNOMED, the value comes in querying, retrieval, decision support, all those uses of the codes. The key thing being that you can record information with as much detail and precision as is relevant to your particular use case. And then when you're retrieving information, so generating reports, doing decision support, identifying cohorts of patients and so forth, you can use the broader meaning codes, the more general codes, and the relationships there allow you to identify which codes are in scope. So, some words you may have heard over the last little while talking about SNOMED: hierarchy, relationships, perhaps primitive concepts and fully defined concepts. what are these things? So a quick leap across to some tooling. I hope that transitions work for you. And this is the shrimp browser, and we can see here in this view the hierarchy showing the ISA relationships between concepts, and we can move around, move up the hierarchy here and see the sorts of relationships that might exist. I'll just step back a little bit. And then down here, in the bottom of the screen, we see the SNOMED diagramming syntax that details the actual definition of, in this case, myocardial infarction. So there we go. So we can see it here that it has 4 immediate parent concepts. And so these are the ISA relationships going up the hierarchy, sort of more general. And then 2 defining relationships here, the associated morphology being infarct and the site being the myocardium structure. So these are the things that give a concept its meaning. It's coloured here in purple because this concept is a fully defined concept, fully defined meaning not primitive. And really the meaning of fully defined or not primitive is that the relationships here are all the relationships that are sufficient to be able to infer this concept. So if I tell you that I have a clinical finding or in fact a disease here, because that's the primitive parent. If I tell you I have a disease with a morphology of infarct and a finding site of myocardium structure, then you can infer that statement is equivalent to saying myocardial infarction. So all these concepts that are purple are fully defined by the relationships that you see down here. So we can see, for example, cardiac finding is any finding that has a site of the heart structure. And so that will then have as either immediate or other descendants every single concept that has a finding site of the myocardium structure. And that's how this hierarchy is built up. So that's the way that all these ISA relationships are developed and how we're able to reason about it. So how does this work? Well, the meaning of these concepts are actually grounded in a thing called description logic. And if you want to delve into the details of description logic, Google OWL and semantic web. Don't look at the RDF stuff because that has a different semantics. Look at the OWL stuff. And that mathematical underpinning gives you consistent reasoning. So it means that tooling will always give the same answers because we've got a common way of reasoning about what those relationships mean. So we now get a little bit deeper actually into how this works, but without getting into all the maths. I've got a simple example to walk through. So here we have some primitive concepts, pain, which finding as being a clinical finding, body structures of a lower limb structure and a calf structure. And we're going to look at this new fully defined concept, a lower limb finding, which we define as being a kind of clinical finding and having a finding site of a lower limb structure. And down the bottom here, you'll see the post-coordination syntax without the SNOMED IDs, just for readability. Now, we define a new concept, pain in the lower limb, and we define that as being a pain and being a subtype of lower limb finding. So these are relationships again. then a reasoner will infer that pain in the lower limb also has a finding site of lower limb structure. And that's because everything that's true of the more general concepts is also true of the more specific concept. So lower limb finding had a finding site of lower limb structure, therefore pain in the lower limb must have a finding site of lower limb structure. We can also define another concept, pain in the calf, which is here defined as being a pain and the pain being located in the calf structure. And because calf structure is a lower limb structure, a reasoner can infer that pain in the calf is a kind of pain in the lower limb, so it can infer this is a relationship. You can see here that different types of relationships can be inferred. Now, all this inferencing is done by a reasoning engine. In our case, or in the case of the IHG SDO and Australia, SNOMED is used in their tooling, and that's the tool we developed. And it's all pre-computed, and then these inferred relationships are all the things that come in the SNOMED distribution. But the way SNOMED's maintained, it's maintained not by specifying every single relationship, but just a subset of the relationships, and then the rest are inferred. This is also the process that goes on when you're doing post-coordination, because when you're doing post-coordination, you're effectively defining additional relationships and defining what you might think of as a virtual or unnamed concept. And then by performing this reasoning process, you can work out where in the hierarchy that post-coordinated expression would sit. And so it might sit as a leaf thing, like pain in the calf here, or it might sit somewhere internally, like pain in the lower limb here. So in fact, if we look at this expression here, pain plus lower limb finding, that post-coordinated expression sits exactly there in the hierarchy. So hopefully that will have given you a bit of a feel for how that sort of reasoning goes on. This is the slide on post-coordination and diagramming. So you've seen some examples before of post-coordination. This is what it really looks like when you have to write it down. The tooling, you actually have to use the codes. The labels here in between the vertical bars are just for human readability, and so that's what we've been passed around under the hood. And then this is the diagramming equivalent of that expression. These curly braces here correspond to a thing called role grouping. Role grouping is basically used to link relationships together. For the most part, that's not strictly necessary, but when you have certain concepts such as procedures where you're acting on a particular site in the body, but you're perhaps accessing it via some other part of the body, you'll have two sites that you need to talk about in the expression, and you need to know, or you need to tell the machine which one you're performing the action on and which one you're accessing the action site via. So you need to be able to group things together, and that's what the curly brackets do, and that's represented here by this this white circle in the diagramming syntax that groups things together. This post-coordinated expression here is actually equivalent to this one here, so you don't have to build everything up from its primitive pieces, as you see in this expression. You can take an existing concept, such as appendicitis, and refine just one part of that definition to define, in this case, acute appendicitis. So I've titled this Tooling Summary. It's not, of course, all the tools, it's the tools we've developed at the CSIRO, because they're the ones I know and most familiar with. So Shrimp, which has been mentioned earlier, which I was demonstrating, so this being Shrimp. This allows you to browse SNOMED through the hierarchy, look at the diagramming syntax, access the search. So we've got very responsive search here, and the search algorithm is a variant on the word prefix any order approach. So here, just typing 5 keystrokes, I can get straight to the concept I'm looking for. And research has shown that this strategy is the most effective at locating concepts in a very large terminology like SNOMED. The other smarts then becomes in the way you rank the search results. Because you see here we've got actually lots of matches, but you want to be able to rank the most likely ones higher up the list. Here you can see these are all the reference sets that NETA, the Australian National Release Centre, publishes. So we might want to restrict our search to just clinical findings. In fact, in this case, we will just get clinical findings. So this is just clinical findings being matched, but if we broaden to just anything, we'll get body structures and all sorts of other things, procedures and so forth. This tool also allows you to browse the contents of the different reference sets. So you can have a look here, step through what's in there. And future version will allow you to look at FHIR-based value sets. So for those of you who are getting interested in FHIR and its possibilities, future version of Shrimp will also allow you to have a look at the contents of FHIR-based value sets. I think I picked a big one there by accident.
Michael, you can't see all the people in the room. There are about 90 people here and they are all pretty engrossed by this talk of yours. I'm just wondering the reasoning capabilities that the terminology offers. Do you see that as just something that's relevant to the development of the terminology itself, or do you see it as something that can be used in frontline clinical software?
So I think the majority of use in the near term will be in the development end of things, in the development and management of the SNOMED content and SNOMED extensions. But that's actually a slightly handy segue to the next bit of tooling I wanted to talk about, which was our terminology server and the SNOMED query language. The query language this is the documentation. This is actually not the standard SNOMED query language. It was a previously proposed SNOMED query language that we implemented as a proof of concept. And the new SNOMED query language has not yet come out of the standardization process. We're working on that rapidly at the moment. But all these sorts of capabilities are part of that query language. So navigating up and down the hierarchy with parents and children's relationships, looking at ancestors and descendants. So this is where you're actually interacting with the pre-computed relationships. And the perhaps more interesting thing is a query like this one. which is looking at all concepts that have a relationship with the finding site of the appendix structure. Interesting. Got little encoding problems there. That's essentially what the query is, that find every concept that has this relationship, and you can browse through the matching concepts here. The query language itself will, when the standardization process is finished, will support queries that involve the post-coordination syntax and variants of it. So this query would be written as something like anything that has a finding site of the appendix structure. So you can see that this mirrors the syntax of the post-coordination syntax. And if we wanted anything that has a finding site of the appendix structure or any of its descendants, then we would add this double less than prefix. So this is how you might then interact with post-coordination and inferencing in tooling and in those sorts of use cases.
Michael, I'm just going to invite one question from the audience. Who would like to? Great. Now, I'm not. It might be easiest if you came here so that Michael can see you. You can be loud. We've got a loud person wanting to speak to Michael.
Well, it wasn't clear whether shrimp can be queried using APIs or query language of some kind, and whether that's possible for New Zealand. And the other question was whether SnowRocket is open source and described somewhere in a white paper or similar.
So I think there were two questions there. One was about shrimp and an API. So shrimp is actually just a web page with a bunch of JavaScript talking to ontological, which is our terminology server. So ontological is the thing that really has the API, and you can find that at ontological.csiro.au, and there's documentation there on the API, how to use it. Feel free to play with it. It's there as a kind of a sandbox implementation, and we do license it. So obviously don't build any real world apps talking directly to that endpoint, because it could go away at any time. We don't offer any sort of guarantees of its behaviour. In terms of content, it has the Australian version of SNOMED, various Australian versions of SNOMED, the Australian medicines terminology, and some other things in there. The other question was about SNORocket. SNORocket is actually open source. It's Apache 2 licensed. It's available on GitHub. So if you Google for SNORocket and GitHub, you'll find it there. It works as a plugin to Protege. So if you're familiar with the Protege tool for working with building your own ontologies, CAL-based ontologies, then Protege is available directly within that, so it should show up as one of the available reasons.
Michael, look, thank you so much. You've given up your afternoon to join us here. I think we're all impressed with the cutting-edge work you're doing around development of SNOMED, and I don't want people to go away thinking that there's a quite different Australian SNOMED to an international SNOMED. The things are all moving in the same direction. Thank you very much, Michael.
Right, thank you.
We'll have a round of applause.